My name is Carlin Burisenko, and you're listening to the Actively Unwoke podcast. You can find a full archive of the podcast over on my Substack, Carlin, Karlyn, .substack.com. And while you're there, you can support the work I'm doing by signing up for a membership for $8 a month, $80 a year. That gets you a whole bunch of perks, and you can find out more information over on the Substack. All right, I've been putting this off. Okay, if I'm being honest about it, I haven't really been putting this off. I've been talking about it on my YouTube channel all the time. For people who don't follow my almost daily streams, I stream Monday through Friday on YouTube, on X, and on Rumble. You can just look up my name, Carlin Burisenko. It'll come right up. I stream on Saturdays at 6 p.m. for Socialism Saturday. And I've actually been talking about today's topic a lot lately on the daily streams, but I'd kind of been putting off doing a podcast on it just because I'm not really sure why. But we need to talk about James Lindsay and Logan Lansing. And I'm just going to be blunt. People are giving me grief for talking about this so much on my YouTube channel, and I'm sure I'll get extra grief for talking about it now on my main podcast. I've already done an episode about James in a previous Inner Circle podcast. I've written a little bit about it, but I don't care. I don't care if people don't like that I'm talking about this, because this is legitimately one of the most disturbing descents into madness that I have ever witnessed in my life. You know, I stopped listening to James Lindsay's work over 3 years ago. And I would catch snippets here and there if someone sent me something or if someone told me he was specifically talking about something that was related to what I was talking about. But more or less, I just stopped listening to it because I didn't want to be influenced by it. And I kind of, in the back of my head, was like, I need to go analyze the real world socialist activists. I need to go to the people who are actually pushing critical race theory and gender ideology and all that stuff in the real world. I want to figure out what they're doing in the real world. And so I blocked myself off from basically everyone's content. It wasn't even just James. It was everyone's content, thinking no one else is focused on the real world activists. Everyone's talking about the philosophy and Marx and Engels and Marcuse and Hegel and the Frankfurt School and yada, 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 yada. Everyone was focused on the philosophy of dead people. And so I decided to take a different route, and I wanted to focus on what are real leftist activists doing in the real world? What are they saying in their trainings? What are their organizations? How are they pushing these ideas? I wanted to get highly practical about it. The assumption that I made in the time that I turned my brain off to what James Lindsay was saying was that he wouldn't lose his goddamn mind. And listen, I understand better than almost anyone how immersing yourself in the far left can drive you to the brink of insanity. I will be the very first person to say that watching far leftist training almost every single day of my life for over 3 years now has absolutely messed with my head. 100%. But I know that, and I do my very best to keep it in check and to make sure that I'm questioning my own confirmation bias and trying to be responsible about the information I articulate. This is why it's so important to me that we put receipts out there, that every single thing I say, you do not have to take my word for it, because I'm going to show you a video, or I'm going to show you an article, or I'm going to show you something, some piece of evidence that says, here is my conclusion, and here is why I have that conclusion based on the real world evidence. And I made the assumption that James Lindsay was going to be a responsible human being and, quite frankly, a responsible academic and do the same thing. And at some point, something happened and he schismed off into the insanity of his Gnostic conspiracy theory. Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, that's probably because you're not following James Lindsay's work and haven't been for a while, because he has for over a year now, and probably even longer, been just descending into this fantasy that every crazy woke idea actually stems from a secret Gnostic cult that is taking over the world and is going to force everyone into a one world religion. I'm not making this up. Now, people are allowed to have crazy ideas. God knows. And I don't begrudge anyone having crazy ideas. However, when those crazy ideas then make their way into a book that James Lindsay co-authored with Logan Lansing called The Queering of the American Child, and you have parents that have kids in school that are being affected by gender ideology and queer theory right now, who are being targeted by queer Marxists and recruited over to their far left ideology. When it starts to become a problem to have crazy ideas, when you take those crazy ideas, position them as the only true thing in the world, and then lie to parents who are just looking for help in figuring out what's going on with their kids. That's where I start to have a problem with it. You know, someone recently bribed me to read this book and to analyze it, and so I'm going to have to read the book at some point. But in the meantime, I've heard enough about the book to know what's in it, and I also know enough about what James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are talking about publicly to know that this is a problem. Now, let me break this down for you guys. On the Substack, the show notes for this episode, you are going to be able to find, and this is going to be episode 50, by the way, so you're going to look for the Actively Unwoke podcast over on my Substack. Just go to carlin.substack.com, click podcast in the upper menu, and it'll take you right to it. You're looking for episode number 50. In the show notes of this, you are going to find screenshots of everything I'm about to tell you, and you're going to find a video that I'm about to play for you. So again, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go and see the evidence for yourself. The issue I have is this. James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are telling millions and millions of people that queer theory, queer Marxism, which are effectively the same thing, they're telling people that this is not about abolishing capitalism. This is not about socialists trying to overthrow the country and elicit a cultural revolution in America. They are literally telling people that queer theory is a Gnostic sex cult, and that the goal of queer theory is to create a one-world religion that will take away all individualism, and that they're also saying, and this is even crazier, I don't have receipts for this in the show notes, but I have receipts for this elsewhere if you want to go to my YouTube channel and check out there. They're also saying that this idea has been pushed by Oprah, who taught meditation to the masses, and that's how the Gnostic sex cult was introduced to America. I swear I'm not making that up. I swear I'm not. It's so irresponsible. Let me read you just a couple of tweets. Now, James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are obviously forming a messaging strategy because they're tweeting exactly the same thing. On May 12th, they both tweeted, "Queer theory is a doctrine of sex-based cult that primarily targets children." That was James Lindsay. Logan Lansing tweeted, "Queer theory is a religious cult based on sex that primarily targets children." Guys, that's not what queer theory is. That's not what queer theory is in any way. And I've covered this extensively in my work, but just to give you a too long didn't read, and then we're going to get into some receipts. Queer theory, the goal of queer theory is to disrupt normativity. Normativity means capitalism. If you go over to my Substack and you look up the article I did on the Mary Nardini gang, and explicitly it's called, pardon me, just let me get it in front of me. I've posted a lot on the Substack lately. Explicitly, the article is called Inside the Queer Marxism Manifesto. This is the document that is driving queer activism in the United States today. And the Queer Marxism Manifesto is from an anarchist group called the Mary Nardini gang. It's called Towards the Queerest Insurrection. I have a whole article where I break down some of the most important parts of this document, but I want to just play you a couple of clips. In the first clip that I'm going to play, you are going to hear the Mary Nardini gang in this document say, "Queer is the cohesion of everything that is in conflict with the heterosexual capitalist world." Let's listen.
Queer is the abnormal, the strange, the dangerous. Queer involves our sexuality and our gender, but so much more. It is our desire and fantasies, and more still. Queer is the cohesion of everything in conflict with the heterosexual capitalist world.
Queer is the cohesion of everything that is in conflict with the heterosexual capitalist world. That is what queer is. The goal of queer is to both disrupt the gender binary, that means men and women, because queer theory believes, and socialists in general believe, that capitalism, which is defined as private property ownership, created the gender binary, which put men in the workplace where they had access to all the power and the money. It put women in the home to do the unpaid labor of raising the next generation of proletarian workers to be oppressed under capitalism. And so the goal of queer theory is to disrupt normativity, or to go against, or to align with everything that is in conflict with the heterosexual capitalist world. Now, in this case, heterosexual doesn't actually mean gay. It's more a reference to queer. This document was written a while ago. This was written before gay marriage was legalized, so it's a little bit of a different time period. But essentially, what they're saying is that queer is against capitalism. Queer is against normativity. Let me play you another clip from Towards the Queerest Insurrection, where it literally says the liberation of queer people is intrinsically tied to the annihilation of capitalism. Let's listen.
The history of organized queers was born out of this position. The most marginalized trans folk, people of color, sex workers, have always been the catalysts for riotous explosions of queer resistance. These explosions have been coupled with a radical analysis, wholeheartedly asserting that the liberation for queer people is intrinsically tied to the annihilation of capitalism.
The liberation of queer people is intrinsically tied to the annihilation of capitalism. So the goal of queer, in the stated materials of the far left, and those are just a couple examples, and I'm going to give you a couple more before this podcast is over, but I can literally give you examples for days of them saying this. The stated goal of queer Marxists, queer theorists, is to abolish capitalism, is to liberate the queers from capitalism, because they believe capitalism created the gender binary. That's why they want to abolish that. Non-binary means no binary. Everyone with they, them pronouns is aligning themselves with a far left political ideology known as queer. You do not have to be gay or trans to be queer. All you need to do is say you're queer, because it's just a political ideology. So queer theory is trying to abolish the gender binary because they believe capitalism created it. They're also trying to abolish the nuclear family because they believe that the nuclear family, via social reproduction theory, is the literal means of production of capitalism. And in fact, I've got one more clip from the Mary Nardini gang here where they explicitly say the normal, the straight American family has always constructed itself in opposition to queer. Let's listen.
Chapter 5. See, we've always been the other, the alien, the criminal. The story of queers in this civilization has always been the narrative of the sexual deviant, the constitutional psychopathic inferior, the traitor, the freak, the moral imbecile. We've been excluded at the border from labor, from familial ties. We've been
excluded at the border from labor. That's the reference to capitalism. They're saying essentially the evil, normative, capitalist system is oppressing us because we're different. We're outside the bounds of what's considered normal, and so we are excluded from the border of labor.
Forced into concentration camps, into sex slavery, into prisons. The normal, the straight, the American family has always constructed itself in opposition to the queer. Straight is not queer.
The American family has always constructed itself, look at this, the American family has always constructed itself in opposition to the queer. That's the reference to abolishing the nuclear family. Queer is in opposition to the nuclear family. So you hear me doing commentary on that clip as well. You can find all these clips again over on my Substack. The title of the article is Inside the Queer Marxism Manifesto. I will also link these in the show notes over on the Substack. So when Logan Lansing is saying queer theory is a religious cult based on sex that primarily targets children, and James Lindsay is saying queer theory is a doctrine of sex-based cult that primarily targets children, where they're obviously coordinating the messaging, and they're writing books saying this, and they're going on all these shows saying this, they are lying to you, and they're lying to millions of people. And the reason that they're doing this is getting conservatives, and especially conservative Christians, all riled up about sex, and getting them all riled up about anything they perceive to go against Christianity is a great goddamn way to make money. This is going to make James Lindsay and Logan Lansing millionaires. In fact, James Lindsay already has a ton of money. He's been doing this stuff for years. He's been grifting off of these people for years. But it's infuriating to me because I did nothing for 3 years but listen to what the left was saying. And I listened for the pedophile stuff. I really did. I thought I bought into the groomer narrative as much as anyone else. And I do think there is some truth to the groomer narrative in regards to schools are trying to convince kids they're queer, they're non-binary, they're gender fluid. But that's not because they're grooming them for sex. It's because they're trying to abolish the gender binary. Again, that is what non-binary means. When they're trying to convince kids through social emotional learning and through different classes and different things they're integrating into the curriculum that they're queer or gender fluid or gender non-binary, that is an explicit attack on the gender binary. They're trying to convince them that gender is not a real thing. That is what the goal of queer Marxism is. It has nothing to do with sex at all. I have this piece that you can find in the show notes. This is a section that's taken out of a piece of queer anarchist literature, and we're going to be doing a lot of deep dives into this on the Substack moving forward, because a lot of what James Lindsay and Logan Lansing have failed to grasp is that a lot of queer Marxists, the queer activists, the ones that are actually doing this stuff in the real world, they're inspired by the far left queer anarchist literature. This is stuff that James Lindsay's never read. This was posted by a member of my community, Stony Baloney. Shout out to Stony Baloney. Obviously, that's not his real name, but, we go by anonymous names on the internet. Let me read this to you. All of these so-called adult responsibilities stem from capitalism. If you actually have a problem with the stress and uncertainty that come with trying to survive in a capitalist society, you should turn your attention towards capitalism. Do not weaponize your situation against youth. Being oppressed or just affected on the access of capitalism does not negate your social power as an adult. And it's not like capitalism doesn't affect youth. Being born into a poor family affects one's life quite significantly, even without adult responsibilities. I'm middle class myself and not speaking from lived experience, but this seems to be common sense. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then schools are becoming increasingly neoliberal. You see third grade test scores being used by private contractors to predict the number of prisons they need to build. To be clear, this doesn't affect me as I am a white person. A prison industrial complex is anti-black at its core. But here's the part I want people to listen to. To summarize, adult responsibilities are real. They do not entitle you to violate our autonomy. Fuck you. Important P.S. Pedophilia. I haven't seen this on Tumblr yet, but inevitably some dickwad will find this post and latch onto the idea of full personhood, full autonomy as an excuse for their pedophilia. Fuck those people. What you're reading there is a piece of queer anarchist literature that is explicitly about the idea of adult supremacy, and it's explicitly about the idea that children are private property of adult supremacy, and the reason the left wants to abolish one of the attacks that the left is making on the nuclear family are attacks on parental rights. They're saying that parental rights make children a form of private property. What you're seeing in this document, I think this is actually written by someone that's underage, kind of railing against the idea of adult supremacy. What you're seeing in this document is them saying, children have full personhood. We are not private property. We have full personhood. And just because you have adult responsibilities doesn't mean we don't have full personhood. And then they're explicitly saying some assholes are going to use the idea of full personhood for children as an excuse to engage in pedophilia. Fuck those people. They are explicitly in the queer Marxist literature denouncing the sexualization of children. It could not be more specific. But yet we have James Lindsay tweeting, queer theory is a doctrine of sex-based cult that primarily targets children, and queer theory is a religious cult based on sex that primarily targets children. No, it's not. Every piece of literature we have from the left, every training that is done from the left is explicit. The goal of queer theory is to abolish capitalism. The Mary Nardini gang explicitly says the liberation of queer people is intrinsically tied to the annihilation of capitalism. They explicitly say queer is the cohesion of everything that is in conflict with the heterosexual capitalist world. They explicitly say the normal, the straight American family has always constructed itself in opposition to queer, and as a reminder, the far left believes that the normative nuclear family is the literal means of reproduction of capitalism. So pardon me if I get a little fired up at the idea that one of the most prominent people speaking out against the far left is lying to his audience and making them believe something that just overtly is not true. Let me give you one more example of this. This is a quote from Logan Lansing on Twitter on May 11th, 2024. Logan says, "If you think communism is about economics and capitalism, you're completely unequipped to deal with the spiritual battle that we're in. Communism is a project to direct the socio-spiritual evolution of man, i.e. a project of becoming God. It won't work. It can't work." Well, Logan, and as a reminder, Logan wrote the book, The Queering of the American Child, with James Lindsay. They are partners in crime. Well, Logan, actual queer Marxists would disagree with you. I'm going to play a video. This is a video of a woman that people who follow my work know well. Her name is Sophie Lewis. Sophie Lewis is one of the leading abolish the family socialists in the world. This is from a lecture that Sophie did in February 2024 called A Happy Ending for the Capitalist Family. And let me allow Sophie to explain the origins of queer theory.
And I am interested in queerness in the sense that I'm a goddamn, communist of some description, a narco-communist who wants to, destroy private property. And queerness was evolved conceptually as an insurgency against private property, in a sense.
Queerness was evolved conceptually as an insurgency against private property. Why is that? Because socialists, the far left, define capitalism as private property ownership. One of the things that they include under private property is parental rights. They believe that parental rights are a form of private property that should be abolished. This is where all the attacks on parental rights are coming from. This is where that anarchist literature that I just read to you, attacking the idea of adult supremacy, comes from. The idea of adult supremacy is that adults own children, and socialists don't believe they should, because they believe that children are autonomous beings that can make all their own decisions. And this document is railing against the idea of adults owning children as private property. That is how they define parental rights. And it's also saying this is not about pedophilia. F you people, do not bastardize this concept to make it be about something it's not. They are explicitly warning against what James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are doing, because they know that's not the point. That's not the argument they're making. So I don't know what to say. I could go on and on and on and on and on for hours and hours and hours about this. And I probably will more on my YouTube channel, and I probably will more in the Substack, and you'll probably hear future podcasts about it. But this is a case of the emperor has no clothes. And these messages that queer theory is a Gnostic sex cult that's trying to indoctrinate children, these are spreading to millions of people right now that are just looking for help with their kids. Their kids are encountering this crazy thing called gender ideology in schools, and parents don't know what to do. And in return for that, James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are delivering them queer is a Gnostic sex cult. That is not true, and it's not even actually the most dangerous thing about this. This is what's really infuriating. If the queer Marxists win because people are distracted by the people who are supposed to be leading the fight against them, I'm going to say that again. James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are distracting everyone from what actually matters, which is that queer theory is trying to abolish the gender binary. They're using the schools to do it. That's why all the kids are identifying as genderqueer, gender nonconforming, gender fluid, all that. They're literally teaching this in the schools, but we don't pay attention to that because queer is a Gnostic sex cult, and that's more important. They're grooming children, but we don't pay attention to how the grooming actually works. The grooming is about teaching them the gender binary isn't real. It's about teaching them that men and women are not real. They're doing that every day in the schools. And they're getting away with it because people are completely distracted, and therefore they aren't looking for it because they don't understand what it is. And that attack on the gender binary is a direct attack on the nuclear family because the far left believes that the nuclear family is the literal means of reproduction of capitalism. This is the goal of queer theory. If you ask any queer Marxist, they'll explicitly tell you they're not ashamed of it. In fact, let me play you another video, just real quick, from our friend Sophie Lewis in this exact same speech. Let me play you what she said about parental rights.
Yes, it's true. What the far right says, feminism wants to abolish the family. To hell with family values, and all capitalist value for that matter. And fuck parents' rights. My hunch is that just beyond the horizon, beckoning to those of us who want to hear it, there is a world of relationship no longer strangled by scarcity and no longer held hostage by economics. Thank you.
This is what we're talking about, folks. This is what the deal really is. And anyone who listens to the left knows this. A farce is being perpetrated on millions of people who deserve to know the truth, who need to know the truth if they're going to protect their kids. And what James Lindsay and Logan Lansing are doing with this Gnostic conspiracy theory is going to result in people getting their children taken away, in people getting their children accidentally sterilized, in people having kids that go in for the surgery to cut off perfectly healthy body parts because they've been convinced they need to do this by an after-school club that no one's paying attention to because we're all running around freaking out about a Gnostic sex cult. I don't know why people can't see this. If you want to defeat the left in the real world, you actually have to exist in the real world. You have to pay attention in the real world. You can't just make up fantasies that rile people up for outrage porn and clicks and cash on the internet and expect that to be effective. All the evidence is out there. All people need to do is look. I talk about this stuff all the time, and yet still, the predominant perception right now on the so-called anti-woke right is that queer theory is a Gnostic sex cult. And that's why the right will lose and the left will win. That is why we are all inevitably effed. And no, it can't be both, because I've had people saying this to me too. People are like, well, why can't it be both? Because reality exists. And just because you make up a fantasy that gives you a monster to fight against doesn't make it real. So no, it cannot be both. It is explicitly one thing. And the left is very clear about what that is. They say it all the time, but no one on the right listens to them because they're following around James Lindsay as he's going Gnostic sex cult, Gnostic sex cult, Gnostic sex cult, Gnostic sex cult, over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm sorry, but it is infuriating. Listen, I don't have kids. I'm not going to be impacted by this. And truth be told, my kind of current attitude towards this whole thing is that I'm doing everything I can to show people what this is. I'm trying to show with receipts, being pragmatic, being nuanced. And if people want to follow the fake fucking monster down the road that's been invented by James Lindsay and Logan Lansing that is not grounded into reality, and if their kids get hurt by it, you get what you get, man. And it makes me sad to say that, but you had every opportunity to take a different road. You had every opportunity to follow where the evidence actually goes, and you picked the Satanic Panic Part 2 because that's what this is. This is a second coming of the Satanic Panic. I lived through the first Satanic Panic. I was a child when it happened. I think I was like, I was around 10 years old when it started. But I remember it. That wasn't real then. It was a complete distraction then. That lost the right, the culture war for a generation. Do people actually remember this? The Satanic Panic, the original Satanic Panic that took place in the late 80s and the early 90s, lost the right, the culture war for a generation. This is the Satanic Panic Part 2. And people are either going to get their shit together or they're going to lose. So make your choice, guys. Are you going to get your shit together or are you going to lose? My work is a place for people who want to get their shit together. If you want to know more, you can head over to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. You can also join me for almost daily live streams Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. on YouTube, X, Rumble, and I stream Socialism Saturdays on 6 p.m. where we watch the real far left. The clips we played for you from Sophie Lewis tonight were from this past week's episode of Socialism Saturday. If you want to watch that full episode, that was on May 11th, 2024. And you can see for yourself, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can always see for yourself. I'm not going to sell you some fantasy that doesn't have basis in reality and then go pinky swear, trust me, bro, because we deal in reality here. And reality is so much worse than the fantasy that's currently being sold for money and clicks and clout on the conservative right. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. We'll see you soon.